And today I've got one of the most unusual, if not the most unusual sermons that I've ever preached. I even had to ask God, you got to be kidding me. This is what you want me to start with for this season, is this subject? So stay tuned, because it might be you who needs it.
Brothers of the world, because brother, you need the word. Brothers of the world.
Thank you for joining us today at Brothers of the Word, because brother, you need the Word. And I was listening to a book. The book was the book that was mandated for last month for my company. And everyone in the company is required to read or listen to a book every month. So we're growing, we're learning. And for this season, it was actually on financial items. So we had 3 books that dealt with finance. And the last book for last month dealt with personal financing. And there was a chapter where the author was talking about, do you need a prenuptial agreement? And as I was listening to that chapter, I heard God speak. This is the subject that I want you to preach on for the first Sunday of the year. I said, what? Whoever heard of anybody, any pastor, ever preaching on, do you need a prenuptial agreement? Now, they may preach on marriage, but not a prenup. I said, you have got to be kidding me. But God, when I tell you, this church they're going to see some things out of this church they've never seen before out of any other church. You've never seen anybody else preach on a prenup agreement in a church. So today's message is simply titled, do you need a prenup? Now, first of all, most of us here, especially those over a certain age, were married or divorced already. So you don't really need a prenup. This is one of those messages that is likely meant for only a very small sliver. But for that small sliver, yea, even the one, it can be a life-changing message. I've often said Jesus went to the pool of Bethesda, 3 porches full of sick folk, healed one, and walked away. God will come in your presence for one person, so this may not be for you, but it may have an impact for someone else or someone you know who you will need to go to brothersoftheword.com, search on Prenup, and you send them the sermon because they may need to hear it. First of all, before I even get into the prenup, and I'm going to deal with it from kind of 3 different reasons. Number 1, why you may be statistically in the pool that may need a prenup. Number 2, what did God say about the prenup? Because he did mention it. And number 3, just some pros and cons of a prenup. So those are the 3 areas. But first of all, if you're even thinking about a prenup, first of all, you need to do the best you can to make sure who you're about to nut with. So you need to make sure, and we've seen this over and over through counseling, through dealing with a whole lot of stuff. The best way to ensure that your marriage is going to be solid, the absolute best way is to marry the right person to begin with. Changing them rascals, oh my goodness. It is what it is. So the best thing that you can do by far, prenup or not, the best thing that you can do is marry the right person to start with. Now, for some of you, that's a whole sermon, and that's all you need to know, particularly if you're not married. Now, what you can do, what's from this church, is a program that Pastor James and Minister Stephanie put together called the Love Screener. It used to be $29.95. They've now put it on the web absolutely free, so you got no excuse. The average wedding is soup. You all know what it costs. But anyway, you can go to the lovescreener.com and listen to the whole seminar. It gives you certain things to go through, certain check marks to go through. Look, if you're talking about spending $30,000 on a wedding and you don't have time enough to go and spend an hour and a half studying the Love Screener, you ought to get divorced. if you don't have enough gumption to go and listen to an hour and a half of something that will help you select the right person, then you don't have enough wisdom to go and put some time into who you're about to walk down the aisle with. And I can tell you this from experience. Everybody I've talked to who's in the divorce, somebody has always told them not to marry that person. Bar none, every case. I always, did anybody tell y'all not to get married? Yeah, my mama told me. Yeah, my aunt. Yeah, my dad. Yeah, I had a prophet told me. Yeah, every single time. So before this is the pre-prenup. Before I get into the prenup, the best thing that you can do is make sure that you are marrying the right person. That's the one thing that makes the biggest difference in the world, because the wrong person is just a job to straighten out. You can't change those habits. You can't change those natures. You just can't change those personalities. You can't change that stuff. I mean, you may be able to change it, but don't you bank on that. Don't you bank on, I'm going to get them and then I'm going to change them. Yeah, you about to change them, all right, they get worse. So the best thing that you can do, the pre-prenup, make sure as best as you can, you're getting the right person. And to help you do that, go to thelovescreener.com. And you take that course, not going to take you long. It take you as long as it takes you to go out to a movie. You can have the wisdom to go do that first before you walk down that aisle, because that could make you the biggest difference. Now, first of all, I'm going to give you some statistics just on divorce so you'll understand why a prenup may be important for some people, because some people say, I love them. I love them, pal. We ain't going to never break up. I love them. Well, it's hardly anybody who's walking down the aisle who will publicly say they don't love the person. There may be some who walking down there who don't love them, but they won't say that. So everybody who's walking down the aisle will say that they love the person they are about to marry. But the statistics just don't say that is real love. Now, when I give out these statistics, I want you to understand one thing. This has nothing to do with you. Statistics are a general aggregate of a mass population. I've read every book that Arthur Conan Doyle wrote. He was the writer who wrote Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock Holmes was the world's greatest detective, and he had a statement. His statement went simply like this. He said, "Man as an individual is an insolvable puzzle, but in the aggregate, he becomes a mathematical certainty." What that means is, if you take 100,000 folk, you can figure out exactly how that's going to break out. But it has nothing to do with you. If you take 100,000 folk, 10 of them may commit suicide, but they got nothing to do with you. So I want you to understand this. The statistics have nothing to do with you, but they are statistics that you need to understand. In the United States, about 40 to 50% of marriages will end in divorce. That's the aggregate. Has nothing to do with you, has nothing to do with your marriage. But if you look around at married couples, 40 to 50% of them are going to bust up. Simple. That's an aggregate fact. And it doesn't matter whether they are in church. As a matter of fact, the church has a higher rate, and pastors are no different. Pastors got just as high as a divorce rate as atheists. That's just a real stat. So don't even say, well, because I know my Bible, I'm going to stay together. No, the pastor knows the Bible. And that doesn't keep pastoral marriages together. They have just as high a divorce rate as anybody else. And even the church has a higher divorce rate than the world. So just because you're in church, no, that fact does not change the aggregate statistics. So it had nothing to do with you, but you do need to know these facts. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 19. Now, I know some of you saying, well, Pastor, this is a modern thing. No. Jesus says this in Matthew 19. Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. This Jesus talking about divorce because the folk were divorcing. They wouldn't have asked him about it. The Pharisees asked him about it. They wouldn't ask him about it if there wasn't a whole lot of divorce going on. So divorce is not just a modern thing. As a matter of fact, when you look at the stats, divorce is down. Divorce is highest among those 50 plus. The younger people are staying together better than the old folk. So some of y'all looking at the young folks and they just ain't solid. One reason they get married later. They don't get married as young as they used to be. So younger people, the millennials, actually have a better divorce rate than the baby boomers. Divorce is highest among those 50 plus. So don't look at the young folks, they just ain't wise, they just stupid. No. The gray heads, and sometimes folk been married 20, 30 years, busting up. So divorce rate now is highest among the older generation. It's lowest among the younger generation. So when you look at the real facts about the stuff, it's interesting. So I want to tell you these statistics so you first of all understand it has nothing to do with you, but it does still have something to do with you. Because you may be in the aggregate, and you need to understand how serious this stuff is, how serious marriage is, and why you may or may not need a prenup. Now, among those who get divorced, black women have the highest divorce rate among all races, roughly twice that of white women. Interracial marriages have a higher divorce rate, but it varies by the mix. There are only two mixes that are lower. White women and black men are twice as likely to divorce as a white woman and a white man. Whites of any gender with Asians are more likely to divorce than white and white. The two groups that have the lowest divorce rate, a white man and a black woman has a 44% less chance of divorce by the 10th year. Now, I know some of y'all don't like that, but I know you don't like it. But a black woman married to a white man has almost half the probability of divorce as a white man married to a white woman. So some of y'all saying folk can't get along with black women, white men can. So I got to admit it's an unusual message, but the second, and it's just the stats. And you wonder why they can get along with them and we can't. That is a question we may have to ask, but yeah, that's one of the two groups that have the lowest divorce rate. And I don't even understand all the reasons why. Those are just the stats. And the other one, the lowest of all of them, even lower than a white man and a black woman, the lowest interracial divorce rate is among blacks and Asians. It's 22%. So it's less than almost half of the 40%. So those are just, anyway, that's just, those are the stats. So that's number one. But for the most part, we're going to be dealing with our own, and divorce is simply a probability. The reason I wanted to bring that out, I don't want you to think that, well, I'm not going to get rid of divorce, and that's just not even possible. Yes, it is possible. And it is possible. It is a realistic fact that you have to deal with, that it is a percentage of stuff, because stuff just happens, folk just change, things don't go like folk figured. Stuff just happens. And As many people have come. Now, one thing I must admit, of the marriages that I performed, I've only had one divorce, and I knew that one was going to be a problem before I did it. I did. I knew it. I said, Lord, and the only reason I did it is because it was a very close family member. And God says, if you don't do this, it's going to cause issues in the family. Even though you know it's going to be an issue with this marriage. That's the only one ended in divorce. But I knew when I said, y'all said I do, I knew they weren't. I knew that up front. And a lot of times, most of this stuff you can see up front if you have the wisdom to see in it. But no other marriage I've ever performed has ever had a divorce. So sometimes you can look into things and you can feel and you can see and you can know. Because some of them I refused to do. And I said, this is going to be an issue. I refused to do. I just wasn't going to put my blessing on that. It's as simple as that. The other thing, even this is a small thing, just even getting, the cost of a wedding makes a difference in the divorce probability. The cost of a wedding. A study by economists Andrew M. Francis Tan and Hugo Malone in 2014 found that couples who spent excessively on their weddings, that is, over $20,000, were more likely to experience divorce than those who had modest celebrations. Couples who spent relatively little on their weddings, under $1,000, appear to have lower divorce rates. This might reflect more practical financial decision-making and alignment of values. Because you all know some of these high-profile celebrity weddings, they spend millions of dollars, and 2 years later, they busted up. The cost of your wedding does not reflect the solidity of your wedding, of your marriage. So basically what their study found, the people who spend the most money have the higher divorce rates. The people who spend the least money stay together better because they're making better financial decisions to start with. Because the average cost of a wedding in the U.S. now is $35,000, and most people go in debt on the wedding. And money is the number one cause of divorce. So if you don't have wisdom going into the marriage, that the marriage done cause you now, you in debt, you're struggling trying to pay this off, it's already a bad sign. And it's going into the thing using unwise stuff. And the third thing about even the wedding is the guest count. A larger guest count indicating a broader social network and family support was associated with lower divorce rates, independence of spending level. And basically that indicates kind of family and friend support. So that's just dealing with the divorce statistics. And I just wanted to give you some backgrounds to just show you. Now, it's a probability, a solid probability, that a marriage today will end in divorce, 40 to 50% as a general average. 1 John 4:18 says this, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love." Now, I agree with that. The problem is it's kind of hard to get perfect love. It just is. I'm just real about it. It's just hard to get perfect love. And because love isn't perfect, that's why some folk need a prenup. If you have perfect love, you don't need a prenup. But if you don't have perfect love, you may need that prenup. A man said, I asked my wife for a prenup because I was worried about losing half my money if we divorced. His friend asked, "And what happened?" "Well, we didn't sign a prenup. Now I'm happily married, and I still lost half my money anyway." A man asked his fiancée if they should get a prenup. She replied, "I thought you loved me unconditionally." He said, "I do, as long as those conditions are written down first." Marriage is like buying a house. You invest everything into it, and the prenup is like signing paperwork that says, if this house burns down, I still get to keep the couch and the TV. I'm just going to give you some example of a few crazy prenup agreements. Number one is actually a weight gain clause. more couples have been including weight gain clauses in their prenups that limit the pounds their spouse can gain. Yeah, it's just that. They just limit the pay. You gain this much. So, but it probably does help folks watch that weight. They going into Weight Watchers if it's tied to money. Money does influence some stuff. A dating clause. High-profile couples have even added to their prenup. Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Facebook, and Priscilla Chan reportedly have, that's a white and an Asian. Yep. Reportedly have it written down that the Facebook founder needs to spend a minimum of 100 minutes with Chan alone outside of the office every week. So she got it in the prenup. I know you're busy, you got all this business to run, but you're going to spend 100 minutes a week with just me. That's not a bad idea. Because when you get busy, especially if you like Zuckerberg, you got all this billions of dollars and all this, multinational corporation to run, and sometimes you could be gone for weeks at a time. So look, you got to spend 100 minutes, which is about an hour and a half. You got to spend, which means he got to come back or fly her there. So she got it in the prenup that if you don't spend 100 minutes a week with me, you have violated this contract. And I don't know how much money he got to give her, but he got to make. Look, I got to go see my baby because if I don't go see my baby, that's gonna cost me $100 million. So he gonna get back. So sometimes prenups even have that kind of advantage in it. Some couples, with 55% of divorcing couples saying infidelity was the reason behind their divorce, they have a cheating clause. And the cheating clause seems to make sense on paper. You can literally make your partner pay if you cheat on them. Denise Richards took full advantage of this when she was married to Charlie Sheen. She reportedly made $4 million off his cheating. There's a no drug clause that you can put in the prenup. If you're engaged to a former drug addict, then maybe you're considering adding this to a prenup. If your partner starts using again, you can make sure they don't get a dime from you. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban reportedly added this clause to their prenup. Urban, a former drug addict, has to keep a clean lifestyle or he'll be cut off from Kidman's fortune if they get a divorce. If you snort it, you're going to lose it. So that's that. It's just a lot of other stuff with splitting up the help, the division of labor. A lot of prenups have a sex clause in it. Some couples are adding in their prenup how frequently they should be having sex. So if you go into the bedroom and somebody say they got a head, you look, there's the contract. There's the contract. So you put a lot of that stuff. So prenups do have some value, and they have value particularly in spelling out expectations. So what is the biblical view of a prenup? Believe it or not, the Bible mentions prenuptial agreements. Prenuptial agreements were a staple in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. It just wasn't called that. It was called a dowry. That's what the Bible calls a prenup. In Hebrew, it's a mohar. But the dowry, basically, it was money paid by the man to the bride's daddy or closest male relative. Women didn't have the authority to own property or money except in unusual cases. They were supported by their husbands, or when the husbands died, by their sons. This is one reason why women in the Bible were so fanatical about having sons. It had to do with their support, because if the husband died, the sons were responsible for taking care of their mama. So if a wife had no sons, she had no support if something happened to the husband. So that's why women that's why it's the rest of the story. So sometimes when you know the rest, that's why women were all tore up if they didn't have a son, because they didn't have anybody to support them. And women all throughout history have lived an average of 10 years beyond men. So what in the last 10 years, you have no sons, you have nobody to support because your daughters don't have any money. So you have, and the your son-in-law ain't going to give you any money. So you don't have any support if you don't have sons. So the Bible had the dowry, and the dowry had a lot of stuff in it, but the dowry was the main way that the woman was supported after the husband passed away. And ideally, the bride price, the Bible also calls it the bride price. The bride price was a deposit of alimony to be invested by the bride's father and used to care for the bride if her husband divorced her or died without giving her sons. So the Bible even had marital agreements or premarital agreements back then, and they were monetary based. Now, premarital agreements are mainly needed when one spouse has way more than the other. If both of y'all going into the marriage and both of y'all got the same amount of money, in all practical truth, you don't really need a prenup. The prenup is really needed when one person has much more than the other, or when your relationship is what's called, it's complicated. So sometimes you need it with a complicated relationship, and sometimes you need it when one person has far more than the other person. And sometimes this can be in terms of a business or just a lot of inheritance or a lot of stuff, and it just makes a difference why a couple may need a prenup before going into marriage. Now, some of the reasons for a prenup. A prenuptial agreement may protect a spouse's assets if his or her mate has a business or practice that is likely to be sued or go bankrupt. When that happens, it can affect the whole, so you had a prenup to separate that stuff. A prenuptial agreement could protect and provide for the innocent spouse whose marriage breaks up because of biblical reasons. Basically, somebody cheating or get high, go off on, all kind of stuff can happen. When one spouse has really not fulfilled the marriage covenant and just messed all up, a prenup can help that. Because sometimes when folk are all off balance, they get mad, they don't want to give. I have seen cases. I've seen cases where the man, he didn't want to give that woman a dime. Not a dime. I was asking God, can I tell this? But basically, well, I'm just slim it down. I had to step in and do what he should have done. And God says, because this is a close in inside of the circle, you must do what he fails to do. And I had to take care of his wife for 7 years. With a prenup, that wouldn't have been necessary. So I done had personal experience with dealing with some of this stuff, because sometimes when people get ready to get a divorce, they not only don't want to do what's fair, they want to hurt the other person. They want to cause pain. So this is not some TV drama. This real life, everyday stuff that probably happens in 50% of divorces. They don't want to just not do what's fair. They want to deliberately and as viciously as they can hurt the other person. So they want to make it where it's just bad for either the wife or for the husband. They just want to make it where it's just bad for them. So the prenup will help. It can't eliminate all of that, but it will help in some of those situations. And sometimes, even just to know the nature of the person you're marrying, are they highly forgiving? Do they hold a grudge? Do they have issues with other family members that they done had for you? If that's the case, they might have an issue with you if y'all bust up. And then, some people are they don't have an enemy in the world. They don't have a harsh word about anybody. They're at peace with everybody. You don't hear them talking about any grudges from that person. If you all bust up, probably not going to be a big problem. They're going to want to do what's fair. But if you got somebody and they got a lot of issues with other folk, they're going to have issues with you when you bust up. you may need a prenup. So it's just some of these things that are very real. A prenuptial agreement awarding the poorer spouse a significant settlement might make the richer partner more willing to work out the marriage for fear of losing money. Who's that? Johnny, it's cheaper to keep her. That was Johnny Taylor. It's cheaper to keep her. So sometimes if you got a prenup and it's cheaper to keep her, it may make you really work to try to keep the marriage together. A poorer spouse who signs away his or her rights to the richer spouse's assets proves that the motivation for the marriage is love and not money. If children are brought into the marriage, the prenuptial agreement can protect their inheritance given by an extended family. So those are just some arguments in favor of getting a prenup, but there are also arguments against getting a prenup. The existence of a prenuptial agreement means the couple contemplated and prepared for divorce before they were even married. So and because my wife asked me that question, because I had a lot more financially than she did when we got married. I had a business, I had way more money, I earned a whole lot more, I was in much better financial condition. So she understood that. I had a house, so she said, do you want a prenup? I don't have one. I told her no. I said, I'm in this thing for the long haul, and I'm not gonna bust up unless you leave me or you die. That's it. That was my mindset. You need to know whether or not you have that mindset or not. So I don't have a prenup because, like with this number one, I didn't even contemplate the possibility of divorce. I'm going to hang in there if it kills me. Now, some folk it does kill. A bad marriage can mess your health up. A bad marriage can mess your health up. I'm telling you, it really can. So most prenuptial agreements aren't designed to provide for the poorer spouse, but to protect the assets of the richer spouse, which is selfish and not in keeping with the unity of the marriage. Financial situations can change during a marriage, and the prenuptial agreement may not allow for the change. In other words, the poorer one may all of a sudden get super rich. So it can change, flip. Prenuptial agreements cannot, by law, decide the fate of existing or potential children, and therefore cannot adequately determine their needs should a divorce occur. So even though these are just some of the things about, there's some of the things about prenups. And the question still becomes, should I get a prenup? I'm going to just give you these criteria. I've given you some, but I just want to sum it up with this. Number one, you don't need a prenup if you all are equal financially, because prenups basically always involve money. They're 95% financial. So if you are financially equal, if both of y'all are struggling, or both of you are making the same amount of money, both of you all have the same amount of assets, if you're financially equal, you fundamentally do not need a prenup. Usually prenups, they are for people who are not equal, and one spouse has just a whole lot more than the other that they've worked for, that the person they're marrying has had nothing to do with. It's like one of the highest, you've had of the billionaires, of the two richest men in the world, well, actually of the three richest men in the world, all three of them are divorced. Elon Musk is number one. I think Bezos is number two now, and Bill Gates is number three. All three of them divorced. But with Bill Gates, who built Microsoft, his wife was right there with him during the building process. with Bezos. His wife was right there with him during the building process. So when they divorced, they got a significant amount. It wasn't like, now see, if Bill Gates marries somebody now, he's going to have a prenup. He's going to have an inch-thick prenup because he's already got all of this stuff. So if anybody who's already got a hold, and then you don't know whether they're marrying you just for the money. That's the other thing that, this other Anna Nicole Smith, she was this young, voluptuous woman, and she married this 90-year-old man, and everybody said she married him for the money because he was a billionaire. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you can see a lot of good in a 90-year-old man. So everybody just saying, all his family coming against the woman because she just after his money, and she's all fine out there on the beach looking like a movie star, and he's shriveled up 90 years old. And everybody's talking. See, you got to understand, sometimes there's intellectual and spiritual compatibility. Everybody just looking at that thing thinking she just after him for the money. So sometimes, it's not about the money. But sometimes it is. So in those cases when sometimes it is, you need a prenup. So if you have radically different financial statuses, then you need to strongly consider a prenup. If the person you are about to marry, is confrontational and has a lot of issues with a lot of folk, you need a prenup. If you've already busted up 2 or 3 times during the dating process, that's not a good sign. So if you've already had a lot of turmoil, and if you've already busted up and gotten back together 2 or 3 times, you need a prenup. So there are some things that will give you indicators and indications that this is a part of wisdom. It's not, you don't let folks tell me, I just wouldn't do that because y'all in love. Listen here, you need to, if 40 to 50% of the people are getting divorced, that lets you know 50% is in high probability range. So if you have some significant assets and you are not 100, or at least 90% sure that you're going to be at peace and you're going to be compatible with this person and you all are not going to bust up, no, you don't need a prenup. And if nobody has told you, you are not to marry them. But if you've had some significant people in your life tell you up front you are not to marry them, you need a prenup. So it's a practical, logical, biblical thing, because those prenups were in the Bible. This stuff was financially based. And money is the number one cause of divorce. Sex is number 2. That's why they got that clause in there about that sex. Sex is number 2. So money is number 1, and that's why God allowed men to have concubines. Sex is number 2. Money number 1, sex is number 2. So if the prenup covers money, and it can cover sex if you put it in there, because some of the couples have it in there. And it's not, see, some of you all are thinking that's the man who has it in there. No. More women are cheating now than men, because they got equal rights now, and they want it. So, yeah, that's just the reality of it. So whether or not you need a prenup depends upon some of those factors, but it is real. I don't know why God had me preach about this today, but there's somebody who's going to benefit from this. And there's somebody, and just talking about it, they just may go to the lovescreener.com, and they just may go through that, and they just end up, I don't need to marry them. By the time they go through the love screen, because if you can't go through the lovescreener.com and come out feeling that this is really the person for you, I told you on last week, I am on day 5 now of a 42-day water fast. And I had been saying this is going to be the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I told you last week, I realized it wasn't the hardest thing I'd ever done. The hardest thing I'd ever done was getting over my ex-fiancée, because I love that woman. That's the hardest thing I'd ever done. And let me tell you about that prenup from personal experience. She called me about, 4 or 5 years ago. I was in my office, and she said, I was worried about you because I had a dream about you. I said, what was the dream? She said, I dreamed that you were in an apartment, just a small, single, one-bedroom apartment, had no furniture in it, and you were just over in a corner, sitting on the floor, all depressed and looking bad, and you had lost all of your shares in the business, and you were just sitting there just in a deep depression. She said, you all right? I said, yeah, I'm fine. I said, well, let me just think about that and see if I can find any significance, and if so, I'll call you back. About 2 hours later, I called her back. I asked her one question. I said, what day is it? And she said, oh my goodness. I said, exactly. It was the day we were due to get married. I said, your dream showed what would have happened to me you may need a prenup. Thank you for joining us today at Brothers of the Word, because, brother, you need the Word. I'm going to ask Pastor James to close us out today.